Hey, campfire crew, let's get it on. Hey gang, if you have been around for a little bit, you probably remember when my channel was hacked and I lost pretty much everything and had to fight like hell to get it back. If you're new, it was quite the fiasco. At any rate, I was contacted by a gentleman who I thought I had permission to use some of his material as far as video work goes, and it turns out I didn't. I had to take the videos down and was meaning to put them back up after we came to an agreement about what we could do, and I never got around to doing that. So I hope you will sit back and enjoy this. It's 3 volumes of stories that I had to take down and never put back up. So we're just going to call them Uncle Josh's True Scary Stories, the Lost Episodes. And for those of you who really need to know, it's volume 51, 5 Frights for Friday, Volume 3, and True Scary Stories from the Great Outdoors. Hope you enjoy it. I'm Afraid It'll Follow Me by Chicken Permission 13. When I was about 7 or 8, I was left home alone for the first time. I was really excited for this because while I love my family, they can be very protective and overbearing sometimes. This was the first time where I was really given some personal freedom at home. But it was also when strange things started to happen around me in my house. Or at least it's the earliest memory I have of something happening. I was in my room just sketching and coloring while listening to the TV in the background, when I realized that a show I don't like had come on. I also realized that I had left the remote next to the TV. As I got up to go get it, the second I was off the bed, a toy that had been on the top of my bookshelf on the other side of the room flew at the spot I was just sitting on. I want to let it be known that there was nothing that could have bumped the shelf, especially not to send it flying like that. There was no AC or windows open, and my door was shut, so none of my dogs could have snuck in and done something to move it. After that, I started to notice strange bruises and cuts on my body. I wasn't super active, but I was enough to just pass these off as nothing at first. But when I got foot surgery and couldn't really do anything for a while, I noticed new and even worse injuries started to show up. I left my door open at night, and my dogs would sleep with me, so that's what I thought it was at first, like most people would. So after that, I started to shut my door at night, at least until my injuries were gone, and told my family the reason and to leave it shut, which they all agreed to do. However, I still kept getting more and more injuries, but when I asked my family, they all said they had left my door shut and had no idea how I was still getting hurt, especially since I was known to be in an almost dead-like state, to put it in my friends' terms, when I slept. This still went on, but they got less intense and soon just became normal to me. I went for a few years without a big incident again, but throughout the time I noticed that I would sometimes get an intense feeling of being watched or see shadows moving out of the corner of my eye when no one else was around. Or I'd hear my name being called, but when asking my family, they all said they didn't call or hear anything. My dogs would sometimes growl at a particular spot in a room, and their eyes would move as if they were watching someone walk around. They would sometimes even go so far as to stand over my body while looking at something that I nor anybody else could see. I've also always had a hard time sleeping. My mom would often joke that I never slept for the first 5 years of my life, but on nights when it's especially hard, I can hear what is almost like someone breathing out in the hallway. It's a different kind of breathing than the overly obnoxious snores my parents produce next door. This breathing is even, but heavy, and still somehow loud enough to be heard over the snores. Over the years, however, it seems to be closer to the point where I will wake up hearing and feeling breath right in my ear, to which I just hold still and pretend to be asleep until I either fall back asleep or it goes away. Every so often, I'll feel like something is holding me down. I've never had sleep paralysis as far as I know. I sleep on my stomach a lot of the time. but sometimes I'll wake up and feel a pressure like hands on my shoulder blades or back. It's hard to describe, but it's a feeling in which I know it's not my family members or really anything human, and I don't think it's sleep paralysis because I know I can get out of it and move. But a gut feeling is telling me I'd really regret doing so. So, I'll let everybody know, I do believe in the supernatural. But even so, I always try to think of a more logical explanation when things happen to me or others, and that's how I tried to approach all of these situations. But the next time something happened, I couldn't reasonably think of one. My best friend had come to my house for a sleepover, and while I told her some of the weird things that have happened to me, I've never brought up the idea of the supernatural. As we were watching a horror movie centered on ghosts, I asked her if she thought something like this could be my situation, and while she actually agreed, saying she always got a weird feeling at my house, we both just continued to watch the movie, trying to lighten the mood. However, my friend took it too far, I suppose, because she started to laugh and taunt my ghost, as she put it. As she did, the device we were watching the movie on switched off, and the movie and games on the shelves next to us all flew off and at us. My friend never said another bad word about ghosts after that. But even to this day, electronics at my house still act up when that friend comes over, but are fine when she leaves or anyone else comes by. As the years went on, I only had incidents that happened a couple of years after each other. I still got unexplainable cuts and bruises, but like I said, I was used to it by now, and the only things that I just couldn't explain by any other logic were rather harmless stuff, like mulch from a plant flying at and almost hitting me, or a metal coffee can in the back of the table against the wall almost falling right on my foot when I walked by. I had recently got a ferret, and I would keep him in the room next door at night so my room wouldn't stink, and because he would often rattle and yank on the bars. However, not long after, I noticed he would be out of his cage when I walked into the room, and I've seen him escape the cage right in front of my eyes, and after that I put a pillow under the table he was on so if he got out up there he wouldn't hurt himself. But what confused me was one day I heard him let out a distressed cry. I thought he was hurt, so I ran into the room, only to see him perfectly fine, but on the bed in that room. That probably doesn't sound too bad, but he's only a baby and isn't long or strong enough to get up there on his own. And when I asked my family, all of them said they didn't put him up there, nor take him out of his cage. I believed them because 1, I immediately ran to the room. 2, I would have been able to hear the door open and close if someone did. And 3, why would he cry out like he was scared or in pain if this was just one of my family members, all of whom he was comfortable with? I mean, just picking him up and putting him on the bed. Another night, we had family visiting, and I gave up my room and slept in the room with my ferret. I woke up in the middle of the night and heard the sound of footsteps pacing in the room, and right after they stopped, I heard the noise of what sounded like when my ferret hops back in his cage. It might not sound weird, but just seconds prior to this, he was on the bed with me, and was on the other side of the room opposite of where his cage was, making it literally impossible for him to have made it there in that amount of time, especially for me not to hear him get off the bed beforehand. I do believe there's a supernatural being in my house, and even though none of my other family is attacked by it, I decided to ask my skeptic of a mom one day what she thought about ghosts and demons. She immediately replied, "I don't believe in any of that stuff." But when I noticed more weird events happening around the house, I asked my mom again, and she replied in the exact same way, but this time I asked what she thought of her house. She then hesitated and said, "Yeah, there's something here." I was shocked, and when I asked her why, she said that for almost all of my life she had seen weird stuff happen around the house. I'm 17 now, and nothing has happened or attacked me in the years, other than the normal cuts and bruises I've been accustomed to. I'm hopeful that it's over, or at least will be over when I go to college next year. But another part of me is waiting. Waiting for something big to happen and actually try to majorly hurt me. Or worse, that this thing is attached to me instead of the house, and that I'll never be rid of the burden that never seems to completely leave me. The Cabin Visit by Wishnot. I've always wondered what to make of this day I went to a cabin in the early 90s. After reading some of the other accounts and finding out other things that happened to people, I thought I would throw mine out there in the mix to see what everybody else thought. This would have to be my first unexplained event that ever happened to me. It wasn't ghostly in nature, but I suppose it could be considered paranormal. I've written about some things I and others have experienced at this cabin, but these events occurred in 2006 to 2014. So let me get started with this one from the early 90s. We have a cabin in the Ozark National Forest that sets in the middle of 80 acres. I've been enjoying it since around 1988, and over the years I would be there by myself to just do some deer hunting with my bow or rifle. On this occasion, I was by myself, and I pretty much keep to a routine on days like that. Up way before sunbreak, coffee, descenting shower, dress, and head down to the lower part of the 80 and wait until daylight. That was my routine. I would set for a few hours and then ease back up to the cabin for a quick bite of breakfast before heading to the upper part of the 80 acres. At that time of my life, I was in construction and worked 4 10-hour days, leaving me with a 3-day weekend. Often this would leave me by myself until later Friday evening, when some hunting buddies would show up. Anyway, this Friday morning I had already been on the lower part of the 80 and made it back to the cabin. I added wood to the wood-burning stove and had some breakfast. It was pushing 10 a.m. as I started easing up the incline of the road that led to the front portion. I made it about 20 yards when a deer jumped out ahead of me, about 50 yards up the road. It didn't go very far, just a bit off the road, and at the time the leaves on the ground were like potato chips and I could hear if it had kept going. I froze in my position as I thought about my next move. I stopped just to the side of a small cedar tree. There was very little wind, and it was in my favor as I stood motionless. I could just maybe make out the tail end of the deer, and I was waiting to see what it was going to do. And that's when I started hearing a very odd sound. It sounded like a mini helicopter coming in my direction. It continued until it would have been straight above me, maybe 25 feet up. Now, I had a completely clear view straight to the sound that was this loud, but nothing was there. It was not causing any disturbance from the wind that might have been obvious. The cedar wasn't moving, nor any leaves that were around me. But this thing was up above me for about 2 minutes, and then suddenly flew up the road and veered off to the left, off to where the deer had stopped. The deer went crazy and blew as it bounced away at a high rate of speed. I was left standing there, wondering what in the world had just happened. I couldn't make any sense of it. I obviously heard something directly above me, but nothing was there. The deer heard it as well and reacted the way that it did. I wasn't so sure what to do, so I continued with my plan to hunt the upper end of the acreage. 20 minutes later, I was sitting at the base of a large oak, patiently waiting for deer to come my way. As I sat there, I replayed in my head what had happened earlier before. I had been there for an hour and a half or so, when again I heard that sound. It flew my way, and it came right above me. And again, I could not see anything. After about 2 or 3 minutes, I finally stood up and stretched my arms out, expressing, "What the hell?" And as I did it, whatever that was sped off again, not to return. I don't have a clue. I would describe it as a single prop something. It didn't have the sound the new drones make. I mean, maybe it was a military drone? I don't know. It would have had to have been some type of cloaking device on it because I couldn't see a thing. And by the sound I surmised it would have been the size of the drones we do see now. The cabin is not anywhere close to a military facility. So what was that kind of tech available in the early 90s to the general public? I have so many unanswered questions. Sleep at the Farm, submitted by Louise C. I'm 64, but when this happened, I was 10 years old. To let you know why I was at this farm, my mom and dad were getting a divorce. We lived in another province than my dad, so they had to meet in Edmonton, Alberta, and my mom had to drive there as we lived in Saskatchewan. So my mom had me stay with a friend of hers. I was told at the time Molly and her husband had no children. When I got older, my mom then told me the truth. Molly and her husband had a son, but he was killed on a rig where he worked. There were no pictures of him in their house, and maybe it was just too painful for them to see. Anyway, we got to their farm in the afternoon. It was cloudy and overcast, so after my mom left, Molly's husband and I played cards till supper time. Now it was getting windy and raining out, and just after supper, the power went out. Molly gave me a lit candle, and I went to the bedroom I was to sleep in and started to read a book. Around 11 p.m., Molly came in to tell me that it was time to go to sleep, and she tucked me in. I kind of laughed it off, as I had not been tucked in for quite some time. Molly just said she needed me to feel safe. I wasn't sure what she meant, but didn't ask what she meant. It was still windy and raining, and I always slept good when it rained, so I went to sleep really quick. Around 3 a.m., their grandfather clock woke me up, and I could tell the weather outside was a lot worse and it was pouring rain. As I was trying to fall back to sleep, I heard a truck driving around and around outside, so it pulled right up to the back door. I lay there waiting for whoever it was to knock on the door, but the knock never came. Then I heard the back door open and slam shut. I was scared and rolled over, faced the wall and pretended I was asleep. I heard loud, heavy boots walking across the kitchen floor and heading to the front room. Molly had a piano in the front room, and whoever it was started to bang on the piano keys. I lay there thinking, why is Molly's husband not up and chasing this person out? But being a kid, thought maybe they were doing the same thing I was, hoping whoever it was would just leave. Also, not far from the farm, there was a working rig at the time. At this time, I heard my bedroom door open, and don't ask me why, but I knew whoever it was standing in the doorway and breathing very, very heavy and very loud. Then I heard those heavy, loud boots coming over to the side of the bed, and a very strong feeling came over me that it wanted me to roll over, but I never moved. After a bit, I can't say how long, I heard the boots leave my room and go out the back door, slamming it. I just laid there very still till slowly I fell back asleep. In the morning, at the breakfast table, I asked Molly and her husband what they had heard and who they thought it was. They both looked at one another and said that they didn't hear anything. As I got older, I thought about that look they gave each other, and it was a strange look. I never wanted to go there again, and never did. So now you know what happened. I'll leave it up to you to decide. And by the way, no, it was not a dream of a 10-year-old. I was very much awake. My Crazy 4th of July Story, submitted by Cody. Here's a story for you that's timely. It happened on July 3rd in 1991. Full disclosure, I'm the reason that this all happened. I take full responsibility. I was a kid and did something dumb, but what happened afterwards was pretty messed up. I own the fact that I was responsible, but anyway, I'll stop babbling and get into my story. I was in high school working at a McDonald's. It was July 3rd, and none of us wanted to be working there at all. We wanted to be out with our other friends having a good time, watching fireworks and all that sort of thing. To add insult to injury, I was closing and also scheduled for the midday shift on July 4th the next day. So basically no holiday for me whatsoever. While talking to my coworkers and contemplating quitting, I knew that I couldn't because I had to save up money for college that was coming up in the next year or so. Before I go any further, I should let everyone know that I'm a male, and at that time, I was in good shape. I'm not huge or intimidating, but 6 foot, maybe 190 pounds at the time. Wiry, and I was really into boxing back then. So I was working the drive-thru, and a car pulled in around 9:45. Back then, our store closed at around 11 o'clock, so at that point in the evening, We were kind of taking things a little lax, but still doing our jobs. Again, we were all kind of pissed we were there, so I'm sure our heart wasn't in it. This guy was acting kind of funny when I started to take his order. He was mumbling what he wanted, and it was hard for me to hear him, and I remember having to ask him more than once how we could help him and what he wanted. He kept asking for a shamrock shake, which, obviously, in the middle of July, we weren't serving. When I kept telling him that we didn't have that, but we could make him something else, he was getting more and more irate. Finally, he just screamed into the intercom that he wanted a Big Mac, a large fry with whatever effing shake you want to make me. That's what he said. I said okay, gave him the total, and told him to pull around. When my coworkers asked what kind of shake he wanted, I just said vanilla. And the dude pulled up to the window, and I leaned out to get his payment. I could tell right away that something was very wrong. He was sweating bullets and fidgeting like all hell, and I again told him the total, reached out my hand to take his money, and instead of giving me the money, he grabbed my hand and tried to pull me through the window. I yelled and told him, "Don't you effing touch me, asshole," and I yanked my hand back. I asked him if he wanted his food, and if he did, he'd better be cool or I'd call the police if he wanted to play that game. He looked at me deadpan for a minute, apologized, and said he thought I was trying to rip the money out of his hand. Yeah, right. He handed me the money, I gave him his change, and turned to get his order, shaking my head at my coworkers with the universal, holy crap look. I got his order, reached out again through the window with the bag to hand him his stuff, and he took it. Without saying anything, he drove off, and I thought, well, that's that. Nope. Within less than 5 minutes, he was back in the drive-thru and placing another order. I recognized his voice right away. I again took his order, which was the exact same thing he ordered the first time around, and just told him to pull around. He pulled up to the drive-thru window, and as I was opening the window, he whipped his vanilla shake at me, and it caught part of the window, but it splashed all over me. Then he proceeded to tell me he was going to gut me like a fish, and that I'd better be careful on my way home. Okay, at this point, my manager, who happened to be walking up to the front counter, heard what he said, pushed me out of the way, and tried to take over the situation. She told him that he was no longer welcome at our McDonald's, and that if he didn't leave immediately, she was going to call the police. He threw his sandwich at her, screamed at me again, said that I was a dead motherfucker, then peeled out and was going so fast he couldn't cut the corner of the drive-thru. He jumped the curb, drove across our grass, almost sideswiped the giant McDonald's signpost, and by the time he was done, jumped the curb back into the street and took off down the road. My manager went to call the police to report what just happened, and the rest of us were just kind of looking at one another going, what the fuck was that all about? I mean, we were all taken aback. It was insane. I was already in a bad mood for having to work 2 shifts on a holiday, and I didn't need this extra drama. The police came out, talked to my manager and me, and assessed the damage to the grass. My manager then called the store owner to let him know what happened, and that's when the other extension on our phone system rang. We had a phone in the back office, but we also had a phone up at the front near the drive-thru where I happened to be working. I knew my manager was on the main line, so I just picked up the other line and said, "Thank you for calling McDonald's. How can I help you?" There was a pause, and then a voice that I had to recognize right away as the guy who had just gone through the drive-thru saying, "Hey, Cody, I'm gonna gut you like a fish." I didn't know what to say. Of course, I had my name tag on, so that's how he knew my name, but the fact that he called to say it again really set me off. My coworker Brian knew something was up and came over to see me and saw that my mouth was open, aghast at what I had just been told. Being a cocky teenager, and this is where I take responsibility for everything, I said, "Is that what you're going to do, asshole? Why don't you come back here, asshole? We'll fuck you up real good. Yeah, I know. Not smart. Again, I said what happened that night was my fault. He started screaming through the phone at me all this crazy stuff about how he was going to kill me and my family. He was going to wait in the parking lot until I got out of work, follow me home, and then, quote, fuck me up. At this point, I was so pissed about everything, I just kept him going and saying all kinds of crazy stuff and threatening him back. My manager came up behind me, tapped me on the shoulder, shook her head, waved her finger, literally waved her finger, and then hung up the phone for me. She said that she understood I was upset, but I couldn't ever talk to anyone on the phone like that again. Okay, so now we're getting down to closing, and everyone is getting things shut down. I'm wiping down the front counters and taking care of things up there before I close out my register. I hear the drive-through beep, but no one answers me when I ask, "May I help you?" Before I can even do anything, guess who pulls up at the window? The same guy. Only now, he's holding up a knife and waving it at me. Before I can say anything or call for my manager, he takes off again, this time managing to maneuver through the drive-through driveway and get back onto the road without jumping the curb. Good for him. I immediately told my manager, who immediately called the police again, who also again came out to talk to us. Now I'm freaking out more than ever. He's already threatened to follow me home, and I don't know what to do. As soon as the police left, the phone rings again. My manager answered it while standing right in front of me, and I could only hear the screaming from, again, you guessed it, this guy. My manager again tried to handle it professionally, told the man he was in deep trouble and the police were going to be looking for him. She hung up, and that was that. Unfortunately, I had ridden my bike to work that night and not borrowed my dad's car. So, being freaked out but also trying to keep my composure and my pride intact, I simply finished up my job, got on my bike, and started to make my way home. It wasn't really that far, maybe 2 or 3 miles. As I was riding down the street, I heard a vehicle behind me, so I glanced over my shoulder, and it was a car with its brights on. It was maybe 20 feet behind me at that point, and I didn't think anything of it. I mean, there were lots of cars out. But that was when I heard the engine rev, and I knew that that car was launching at me. I did another double take and saw that the car was almost on top of me, so I jumped off of my bike onto the grass, and the bike kind of did a Ghost Rider in front of me. The car blew past me and down the street, and now I'm really freaking out at this point because I recognize the car as belonging to the guy from the drive-thru. He went around a corner, and I couldn't see him anymore, so I ran and got back on my bike and started pedaling like mad. I didn't want to go back to my McDonald's because I was kind of halfway home at that point, so I started cutting down side streets to try to throw the scent off this guy. Maybe he wouldn't be able to find me. That didn't work. Less than 5 minutes later, I heard him rocketing down the road behind me again. Keep in mind, these are all suburb residential streets, so lots of stop signs. And what I think was going to be people out shooting off fireworks or just enjoying the night before the 4th of July, well, no one was out. The car came right up behind me again and slowed down just enough to be right behind me. The guy starts laying on the horn, and I jump up onto the sidewalk, and he floors it again and goes up the street. At this point, I actually got off my bike and stood there, started walking it, thinking there's no way I'm going to get back in the road if this guy is going to keep doing this. Another block away, I knew there was a payphone outside of a pizza place, so I got on my bike and pedaled as fast as I could, and I got to the phone booth. It wasn't really a phone booth, just a payphone on a pole. I didn't have any change, so I just hit 0 for the operator and started yelling into the phone that I was in trouble and there was some guy trying to kill me. The operator got me to the police, and again I started yelling about this guy chasing me in his car. As I was talking to the dispatcher, I look to my side, and I see the car barreling down on me again. I'm still on the phone, and this guy hits the brakes, pops the wheels over the curb right at me, and it comes to a stop. The dispatcher can hear what's going on as I drop the phone and start running away. The guy got out of his car, started chasing me through the parking lot of this pizza place, and thankfully it was still open. Two guys came out and wondering what the hell was going on, and got in this guy's face. This paused him long enough for the police to show up and tackle him. He was swinging at the fences, and the two police officers who were detaining him had all they could do to wrangle him to the ground. The two guys from the pizza place tried to help, but the police told them to stop and stay away. Crazy guy in the car was still holding this knife, flailing it around, and cutting himself, which he did more than once. His arms, his thighs, man, I was terrified. I'm not ashamed to admit that as a guy who thought he was being a tough guy earlier in the night, couldn't believe what was happening to me. So the cops finally got him in handcuffs, and an ambulance showed up, and they immediately took him away. I stood there talking to the police as they called my parents to come down and get me and talk to them as well. My manager even showed up after my parents called her, and there was a huge conference in this poor pizza place's parking lot, which I'm sure was not good for their business. I ended up pressing charges against this guy, who happened to be a drug addict and also a felon. They also found a handgun in his car, which was illegal for him to have in the state that I live in. He went to prison for multiple violations, including trying to hurt me. It's been many years since this happened, but it was a terrifying night for me, and every year around the 4th of July, I remember that guy trying to run me down, and I wonder if he had been any faster or smarter, would he actually have pulled it off? Anyway, I ended up quitting my job at McDonald's and ended up getting a job at the pizza place, as funny as that sounds. I do know this guy's name, and every once in a while I will do GIS to see any information about him. I know he got out of jail a long time ago, and I don't know if he still lives in the same town that I used to, but thankfully I don't live in that town anymore. I'm still wary of that guy. I'm sure he's way into his 50s or 60s. I mean, who knows? I can't imagine that he even remembers me, but he might, and all I can say is I'm no longer a scared kid. The threats I made to him over the phone trying to be a tough guy way back when would actually be put into practice right now, especially with my wife and kids. So, to the crazy guy at the drive-thru who tried to kill me on a 4th of July so many moons ago, make sure we never meet. Abduction or Astral Projection, submitted by Ashley K. This is not my story, but I swear it's 100% true. My name is Ariana, I'm 18, and I've lived in Michigan my whole life. The road I currently live on is called Morrow Road, which has been known for many, many years as a paranormal hotspot, most famously for a ghost story, but that's not what this story is about. My family has always gone out on our boat touring islands, so I tend to be home alone for the majority of the summer. I never truly feel alone, though I do not sleep at night. My friends and I, and even my dad, have suspected extraterrestrial activity in this area since we first moved there. This was the summer of 2017, and my dad, my friend, and I were going on one of our famous night walks. It was about 1 a.m., and we had made it about a mile down my road. I was the first one to see it. A bright light in the sky, much, much bigger than a star. I immediately pointed it out to the others, and as soon as they looked up, the light zigzagged across the sky and fluctuated from very slow movements to very fast for a few seconds. Then the light completely vanished. That was the first experience we had. About a year later, in the summer of 2018, my family was absent again for the night, and I was given permission to have a few friends over, because they knew how scared I was of being alone. We were all sitting in the bed of my friend Jacob's truck, just goofing around like any other night. I live out in a secluded area with few houses and tons of farmland, so being parked in my driveway, we could easily see the skies for miles around us. During this time, I noticed another huge light in the sky. This time it was very different, though. It was about a mile or two away, and it seemed to come out of nowhere. It took about a second for the light to drop from where I initially saw it down to the very top of the tree line. The light hovered there for a few seconds before slowly dropping down below the trees. The location it would have dropped down at would have been the setting for the next incident I experienced. My friends did not see this, but they began to freak out once they realized how petrified I was. I said goodbye to them and quickly went inside. A few months later, when the air began to cool down for autumn, I had my most recent and frightening experience. As I said before, I don't sleep at night, so I went to bed at 10 a.m. with the intentions of having my friend Chloe call me when she was ready to hang out. She was getting out of work at 4. I woke up at 3 in a panic and began checking under my bed, in the closet, and all around my room to make sure that I was still alone. After my search was unsuccessful, I went back to sleep because I knew I still had an hour before Chloe would get out of work and call me. This is where it gets weird. I began to dream that I was walking down my road, a very vivid purple and pink sunset filling the sky, as well as huge clouds. I pulled out my phone to take a video of the sky to post on my Snapchat, and right after I put my phone back in my pocket, I noticed a very large, completely perfect circle in the sky in front of me. The circle was completely see-through, except on the other side of it, the sky looked very blue instead of purple and pink like the rest of the sky. I looked over and saw a UFO landing maybe 500 feet away from me, before I blacked out. I woke up in my dream, and I was in an empty lab laying on an exam table. I could tell that something happened to me, but I couldn't exactly tell what. Again, I blacked out instantly. The next time I woke up, I was walking past an old abandoned ranch, and I continued walking down the road. But at the corner, I read the street sign that said Starville and Broadbridge. After that, I actually did wake up. I was laying in my bed, confused because the dream had felt so real. I picked up my phone and noticed that I had a ton of texts, calls, and Snapchats from my friend Chloe, so I called her immediately. She asked me why I was on the corner of Starville and Broadbridge. I began to freak out and told her about my dream, and we both started to cry. She knew my location because she had checked the map on Snapchat. It had said that I was there 4 minutes ago, and every minute that she refreshed it, I got closer to home, all the way down to 1 minute ago. And then I called her right after that, and it said I was back home. She said it was even to the point where she almost screenshotted it because it was so odd, but she thought I was just being an ass and not returning her calls. My mom can even attest that I was home, since she checked on me a few times to see if I was still sleeping. I did not know that Broadbridge was long enough to intersect with Starville Road, until she told me that it said I was on there on SnapMap. We told her uncle, who was very into these type of things, and he drove us out there. To our dismay, there was an abandoned ranch out there that looked exactly the same as the one in my dream. Her uncle told us that he had done dumpster work there years ago when it had first been abandoned. The people who lived there had installed a ton of new and modern things, such as tennis courts and new barns for the property. But then they suddenly just left. All of their belongings were left behind, and the house was sold for an incredibly cheap price. The man who owns it now lives in Florida and only pays the electric bill. When we looked it up on Google Earth Images, there were long, runway-like strips behind the trees in the property that we suspect are being used for UFOs. I'm not sure if I was abducted that day, or if I possibly astral projected to that spot. My mom has a friend who was into the Wiccan culture who has suspected that I astral project all the time. This is because I have very vivid, random, scary dreams. She believes that there's an evil spirit in my house that is reflecting whatever fear and pain is going through or has gone through me, which I interpret in my dreams. She says I must possess a gift, since my phone was able to pick up where I was, and that I may be dreaming at the same time I'm astral projecting, since I don't realize that I'm doing it. She hopes that one day we can sit down and she can teach me how to properly control this gift. I'm not sure exactly what happened that day, but I have a lot of paranormal experiences with aliens, ghosts, skinwalkers, and more. I feel like these things are drawn to me because I can pick up on them. I hope that one day I will be able to understand it. Alabama Highway 36 by MK1. This story took place in the summer of 1996 on rural Highway 36 near Lacey Spring, Alabama. It's a small community located between Huntsville and Hartselle. I was living in Birmingham, Alabama at the time, and my girlfriend, now my wife, was with me for this experience. I'm a professional musician, and I'd come up to Huntsville, Alabama for a gig I had at a local music hall just outside the downtown area of the city. After my show, I packed up to leave, got paid, and we were on our way back to Birmingham. It was approximately 2 a.m. as we were leaving Huntsville, and some inclement weather was beginning to form outside of the west of the city, so my girlfriend and I opted for a shortcut route towards our destination to possibly avoid the approaching storm. We stopped once at a gas station on the main thoroughfare, Highway 231, also known as Memorial Parkway. We got a bottle of water and some snacks for the hour-and-a-half drive back to Birmingham. While in the store, the friendly clerk offered some information that a tornado had been reported due west of Huntsville, and that we'd do well to keep the radio tuned to a local weather station if we were continuing on the road. The entire North Alabama area is considered a year-round tornado alley, so while we are always cognizant of weather, we simply monitor conditions and go about our lives. We continued out of Huntsville on Highway 231, crossed the Tennessee River, and entered the tiny community of Lacey Springs, Alabama. The skies looked ominous as we took a right turn onto Highway 36, which would eventually cross Interstate 65, leading us back to Birmingham. As I mentioned, Alabama Highway 36 is a rural two-lane state road that passes through several extremely tiny communities. There's only one traffic light on the entire 36-mile stretch, and save for a handful of houses and small businesses located along the road, at nighttime the area is nearly pitch black, desolate, and seemingly deserted. Even during daylight hours, traffic on Highway 36 is usually light. Maybe once in a while you'd occasionally see a sheriff's patrol car, a dump truck, or a small trailer with bales of hay. On this particular night, however, my girlfriend and I got the scare of our lives as we turned west onto Highway 36. Small hail had begun to fall, and the winds were picking up. Thus far, the road was absolutely deserted, and there were no lights anywhere. The radio reported a possible tornado was just west of the city of Huntsville, which was now about 25 minutes north of our location. What we saw on our drive in the next 30 minutes will haunt us for the rest of our days. We'd driven west about 3 or 5 miles when the hail turned to light rain, and as we came around a bend in the road, we saw headlights, but something didn't look right. The headlights we saw were not in horizontal array, but vertical, and they had obviously been set on bright, which you might use in inclement weather. The vehicle was facing east. We approached the headlights carefully, and as I slowed the car to a crawl and lowered my window, my girlfriend and I saw that the headlights were from a brand new red SUV, which was lying on its passenger side on the edge of the road, the interior lights on, the engine running, and the driver's side door was inexplicably open. I stopped our car completely and repeatedly yelled out, "Hey, anybody in there? Is anybody hurt? Can you hear me? Do you need help? Anybody need help?" I got no response. The inexplicable thing was that the red SUV looked brand new, and there were no marks or any evidence that the car had been in any sort of accident or had been picked up by the high winds of a tornado. As I mentioned, North Alabama is threatened by tornadoes year-round, and I've seen literally hundreds of vehicles that have flipped, rolled, or been destroyed by the deadly force of a tornado. Vehicles anywhere close to a tornado are always covered in silt and debris, and usually the windows are blown out. The red SUV we saw was absolutely pristine. It looked as if it had been simply lifted by a giant hand and then sent gently on its side. My girlfriend and I decided to continue on, hoping to flag down a sheriff's deputy if we happened to pass one. We didn't own cell phones yet. Just a couple of more miles down Highway 36, we spotted the lights of yet another vehicle stopped near the road. As we got closer, we saw that this vehicle was a green SUV, upside down in the shallow roadside ditch, engine running, all the lights on, driver's side door open, and no one anywhere around the vehicle. Creeped out and concerned, I lowered my girlfriend's passenger side window and again yelled for anyone who might need help. And once again, no response whatsoever. There was no evidence that a tornado had passed through this area, as there were no limbs down, no sign of debris, no trees bent or snapped. It was just a little rainy. But what happened next is the scariest thing I've ever seen. We continued on. It was nearly 3 a.m. We rounded another wooded bend that opened into a clearing on both sides of the road, and already a little freaked out, I noticed the road seemed to be moving. I slowed down. As we got closer, my girlfriend and I saw that the road, the shoulder, the ditches, everything was covered in small frogs, hopping in all different directions. I don't mean there were a couple of hundred frogs in the road. There were thousands upon thousands of frogs. They covered almost every inch of the road and shoulder as far as we could see. Now, we were getting kind of scared. Totally freaked out. Whatever we'd driven into, my girlfriend and I decided that we should get the hell out of there right then. The insane thing is that we kept driving, running over the frogs, sadly, but there seemed to be no end of them. We figured we drove at least 3 more miles before we couldn't see any more frogs. They were everywhere. Everything was inundated with these little small hopping living frogs. We saw no further cars in the road, and we had to make our turnoff towards Birmingham. By the time we reached the junction of Alabama Highway 36 and Interstate 65, we stopped at an all-night gas station to hop out and just were shaking our heads. We simply couldn't believe what we'd seen. 2 different SUVs, one on its side, one flipped on its roof, but with no visible damage. The engines running, the lights on, with the owners nowhere to be found, and what looked like a veritable biblical plague of small frogs covering every square inch of the highway. Now, a few details. Neither I nor my girlfriend had been drinking or had ingested any mind-altering narcotics of any sort. Neither of us are prone to hallucinations, and we are both super alert, highly educated Christian people with no history of psychotic behavior. The next morning, we found that no tornado or high winds had been spotted, reported, or recorded anywhere in the immediate vicinity of our sighting, which ruled out that the wrecked SUVs and the frogs were a product of any weather-related event. Seeing that we're extremely weather-aware, I immediately began researching into this incident with the frogs. Our area does have a high concentration of professional people educated on weather, science, and psychology, so I consulted with some meteorologists, engineers, some scientists, heck, even a psychiatrist friend, and even some people who are known to be lightning rods for paranormal activity. The science guys all agreed that frogs do have a mating season where they will make an exodus from their environment to begin the mating process, but since there were no large enough freshwater bodies nearby, the sheer number of frogs we witnessed could not be explained by animal biology. The meteorologists all agreed that during certain weather events such as a tornado or waterspout, it is highly likely that marine-dwelling animals like frogs could be sucked out of their habitat by the vortex of the winds, but that they would likely be blown quite high into the air and would actually fall back to the ground encased in hail, and very few, if any, would survive a fall from even a height of 20 feet. Also, a waterspout or tornado, would not simply pick up frogs. It would also pick up fish, birds, and water-dwelling vegetation. None of those were present. So, if the frogs that my girlfriend and I witnessed had been sucked up by a storm before being deposited into the road in front of us, it's highly unlikely that many of them would have still been alive. But they all were. Furthermore, the sheer number of frogs and the size of the area where we witnessed them ruled out any type of mating migration. We were left with no rational scientific or meteorological explanation. As for the wrecked but intact SUVs, we called the police and sheriffs, and they had no reports of vehicle accidents in that area for that date and time. 2 people with experience in paranormal activity whom I consulted were equally baffled. I have quite a few experiences which I consider to be paranormal happen in my life, but no other experiences like this. I mean, what could that have been? The wrecked cars are one thing, but a plague of hopping living frogs in every direction for at least 3 miles on a remote highway? I don't know. I have no explanation. This event happened 20 years ago, and it doesn't cause me any fear or anxiety. It was just very scary, unexplained by rational thought and professional sciences. Naked Creep Forces Lockdown by Dallas Princess. For some backstory, I'm female, and I was 13 when this encounter occurred. This might be kind of long, but bear with me. I promise it gets good. This encounter happened around 2013, and I was part of this girls-only group. We'd meet up every week and just hang out and do teenage things. There were different locations around my city, and I obviously went to the one closest to me. It was about 10 minutes' drive from my house. The building where we met was at a massive local park near a lake, which made for plenty of fun times. The group was for girls aged 13 to 17, so we generally all got along well. The particular group that I was in met on Thursday nights, and there were 9 of us. 2 were my family friends who were also my lifelong best friends. Them and 2 other girls, and I went to the same school. There was this camp every year. The goal was to do everything yourself, so we had to set up our own campsite, make all our dinners, etc. It was really fun, and I'd been 2 times previously. It was a competition, and our group split into 2. Me, Erin, Izzy, and Jess. The other 5 girls were in another group. One thing we had to do to prepare was to go shopping for food, so we did that one night, and then spent the other few nights packing everything we would need, like tents, the portable stove, stuff for a fire, etc. My friend Erin and I were in the same class at school, so the Friday afternoon of the camp, we left early and her mom picked us up. We live in the same street, so we got our things and carpooled there with the other girls, Izzy and Jess. The park where all the camps were was massive, so we stopped for pizza along the way. The first few nights of the camp went well. We stayed up all night eating candy in our tent, sneaking out and walking around the park, talking, playing truth or dare, and never have I ever. Normal teenage girl things. On the last full day, we did an activity that we chose prior to going to the camp. Out of all the girls in my group, I was the only one who had chosen to do archery, and I only knew 2 other girls from my main group, and I got to know some of the other girls I didn't know from other groups. During the activity, the leaders started acting weird. They were looking at each other, whispering and talking on their walkie-talkies. The girls I knew from our group back home who weren't in my group, the camp, were doing archery too, so I hung around with them, and we were discussing why we thought the leaders were acting so weird. The leaders seemed to get more scared every minute, and they called us all over and told us to go into one of the buildings because we were going on lockdown. I stuck with the girls, and we and some of the other activity groups went inside. Everyone else from the other activity groups went to a building on the other side of the park, including the girls from my group at the camp. We hung out there chatting to everyone for maybe an hour, and we all talked about the camp so far, and then about what we thought was going on. This one girl called Chloe said that a girl had seen a naked man with a knife walking around in the woods, and another girl named Monique said there was a gang in the woods who knew of this girl's camp and wanted to find someone to snatch. We were all freaked out either way. Then they offered us bathroom breaks, so we went in groups of 4 outside to the bathrooms, and 2 leaders escorted us. There were 2 cop cars outside, and I felt really uneasy, so we started to talk amongst ourselves, but the leaders led us to the bathrooms and told us to shush. When we got into the bathroom, they explained everything. A girl in the orienteering group, her name was Piper, had spotted a naked man holding a knife, so Chloe was correct. They told us it was all going to be okay and that the cops were searching for him, and they had called everyone's parents and the police had finished their search. When this was done, one of the cops came into our building and said they'd got the guy and we were all safe. We were led back to our campsites, and when I saw my friends from the other building back at the tent, I hugged them, and they asked if I was okay, and I asked them the same. Fortunately, no one was hurt, but the girl who saw the man, Piper, went home and was obviously traumatized. We were supposed to cook our own dinners that night on the fire, but to celebrate, the leaders ordered a shit ton of pizza, soda, and fries for us to just have a massive feast. We were all scared as hell that night, and we didn't sneak out of our tent like we had the other nights. Even though the guy had been arrested, we were all still creeped out. The next year, there was this girl in my class named Hannah. I found out she was part of the same girls' club I was, but from another location in my city. I had slightly recognized her after she told me this, and I brought up the incident at the camp from the previous year. She was at the camp too. She was part of the orienteering group who saw the guy, and she told me that indeed he was naked and had a knife. I'm guessing he was on something, but man, that was still creepy as hell. Baby and the Wolf, submitted by Pierre S. Years ago, I got a summer job working in Minnesota as a canoe guide. During that time, my brother's wife was pregnant, and I knew that I would probably become an uncle while I was on the trail. For a few months, I kept having weird dreams of being in the woods and hearing a baby cry. As I would follow the sound, I would get out to a clearing, and there was a baby on the ground crying. But every time I would approach to pick the baby up, a wolf would appear from behind the baby. It would pick up the baby and carry it a bit further away from me, and then sit down with the baby between its paws. Every time I approached, he would pick up the baby again, and then disappear in the woods. But I would just dismiss it as a dream and thought nothing of it, at least at the time. I got a group of American Boy Scouts for an 8.5-day trip, and I love those longer trips. They would allow us to go to more remote locations, further away from civilization. And some of the routes that we had, we would go 2 or 3 days without seeing any other groups or fishermen. During this trip, one of the younger scout leaders' tent broke. Since he was in his early 20s, I let him stay in my tent. I was 18 at the time. The other scout leaders were 40 years or older. This guy was too old to sleep in the kids' tent, as they were all like 13 or 15. On day 6 of our trip, I woke up, and the young scout leader said that I had been talking in my sleep. He said around 1 a.m. I started to say, "Get off me, you're too heavy. I can't breathe." Then all of a sudden, I had sat up in the tent and yelled out, "No!" at the top of my lungs, but then fell back asleep. All I remembered was the dream with the wolf and the baby, but I had no recollection of any other dream or screaming. Again, I dismissed it, didn't think anything about it. I was more embarrassed than anything else. When I got back from camp, I got on a payphone as soon as I had a chance. My father answered the phone when I called, and I asked if the baby had arrived yet, and if I was an uncle, was it a boy or a girl? My father was silent and then broke down in tears. He told me that the baby was born, and it was a boy, but he had died 3 days ago. As I hung up, one of the scout leaders happened to be passing by and saw me and asked if I was an uncle yet. I just said, "Yeah, for a few days," and then I broke down in tears and walked off to a point near the lake to just be by myself. I guess the news spread pretty quickly. Then my boss came and found me, and we talked for a while. He offered me 4 days off with pay. And when I got back to the main lodge, the staff and guests had pooled some money together to buy me a round-trip bus ticket to go back home. After a 15-hour ride to get back home, my parents told me the reason the baby had died. The mother had been breastfeeding the baby at night, as the baby had some fresh breast milk in his mouth and stomach. The only thing that they could figure was that the mother fell asleep and suffocated the baby under her own weight. She didn't realize what she did, and put the baby back in the crib at some point. When my brother came home from work, he picked up the baby and realized he was dead. To this day, my brother never talks about his son's death. The baby's death was around 2 a.m. That's what the coroner said. And this is when it hit me. The night I talked in my dream and screamed, "No!" That was the same night my nephew passed away. And considering I was in another time zone, I yelled no at 1 a.m. where I was. It was 2 a.m. back home. When I showed up at the wake, my heart stopped when I looked at a picture. It was a picture of when he was born. My brother had removed his shirt and put his son on top of the shirt and took that picture. The black t-shirt had a wolf on it, and it looked like the wolf was standing guard over the baby. My horror story, submitted by Felix Foxwolf. I was a caregiver back in 2003, and I worked for a woman named Stella in a small town in Southern California. She had dementia and was 87 years of age, although at her age, she was anything but frail. My mother worked as her caregiver for 3 months until she passed the job on to me. I was a bit confused by it, but I took the job anyway. The first day I met with her son, and my mother tagged along to show me Stella's routine. As we walked in, I couldn't help but notice the countless collection of dolls which filled a large couch. It was so full they were even sitting on the floor. We made our way to the kitchen where there was a key hook on the wall, and before our very eyes, the key hanging on a metal chain stood straight in the air as if being lifted. The son glanced and ignored it as it broke and flew across the room. I asked him and my mother, "Didn't you guys just see that?" But they pressed on as if nothing had happened. I was freaked out staring at the keys on the other side of the room. They just gave me my schedule. I was to work at 5 a.m. to 6 p.m., and the first day of work was to be the beginning of some spooky events. My brother dropped me off since his job was in town. It was still dark, and I had to wake Stella for a shower and breakfast. Her home was extremely cold and dark, and I turned on the lights before making my way into her room. I felt eerie walking in there, like I didn't belong, but hey, it's my first day on the job, and those feelings should be normal, right? She had a small friendly dog named Patches, so I awoke her while the dog wagged his tail. But that eerie, weird feeling just kept going on. I tried shaking it off while I took her to the bathroom for her shower, and even to the kitchen. The feeling of being watched couldn't be shaken off. She then spoke to me and said, "How many children do you have?" I said, "None, ma'am." She began to say that the last lady, which was referring to my mother, occasionally brought over 3 children. I told her that was impossible, all her children were grown, and then I giggled about it. But she said they were so loud and would sing, play, and just disturb me. I told her I was sorry and that no one would disturb her while I was around. She smiled and told me to serve her husband as well. I was confused because she was alone in the house, so I called my mother and asked where was her husband. Should I serve him a plate of food? My mother just said, "He's been dead for a few years, hon. Don't get scared, but she caused his death. If she says anything to you about it, just nod and let it be." I had more questions, but my mother didn't want to discuss anything else. To be honest, I just thought it was an accident Stella couldn't remember. After speaking to my mom, I could hear Stella talking with her husband about me. I heard her saying, "I think she's nice, but we'll see." Honestly, I felt like he really was in the house. But I just let her and them be. I watched TV to try to get my mind off of it all, and I placed my large water bottle on the coffee table. I got up to check on Stella, and she was sitting outside looking at her garden. I asked her if I could keep her company, and she said, "No, you just go back inside with your children. I want to be alone." I was perplexed, but thought she just wanted privacy. so I sat back inside on a rocking chair to watch the rest of my program, when I suddenly heard something squeaking loudly. At first I thought something was wrong with the chair, but the noise was getting louder. I looked around wondering what that nails-on-chalkboard sound was coming from, but I couldn't find anything. I sat back down and was going to grab my water bottle when I saw it screeching across the large coffee table. It slid slowly until it fell onto the floor. I jumped up and was freaked out, so I called my mother and said, "My water bottle just moved across the fucking coffee table. What the fuck is going on?" She told me to calm down, and when I got home, she'd explain. I can't express how badly I wanted to run home, but I stayed anyway. I went to check on Stella in the backyard, and as I was walking through the kitchen, the doorknob to the kitchen pantry was rattling violently. Oh, shit. She locked herself in the pantry, I thought. I got on my knees and looked under the door, and I could see shoes moving back and forth as though in distress, and I could hear cans falling. The knob still rattled. In fear of her hurting herself, I called Stella's son Michael. He came right over since he only lived next door. He said, "Mom, get away from the door so I can open it, and stop shaking the damn doorknob." He was having a hard time putting in the key. Suddenly, Stella came walking up behind us saying, "Why are you yelling at me, making such a racket? I was in my room." The doorknob stopped. Michael opened the door to the pantry, and it was a mess, but no one was inside. It looked like a walk-in closet. There was no way anyone could get in or out but through the door. I was then totally freaked the fuck out, and so was Michael. He just told me that that's not the first time that this has happened, but if it happens again, to not hesitate to call. I couldn't believe he was leaving me alone, but then again he must have had to run off to tell someone what had just happened. He walked off, and Stella and I sat in the living room, the only place I felt safe, only because it was so damn close to the front door. Stella began to knit and talk. She told me that her husband had a big mouth and could be a jerk. I just listened, and she began to say how he had died. The man was fresh out of the hospital from open-heart surgery, and she said she beat his chest till he died. I wasn't sure if she was telling the truth, but she looked at me with wide eyes and a smile and said, "I'm glad he's dead." It sent shivers down my spine and made me sick to my stomach. She looked so sincere. She then yelled, "We're having an earthquake," and as I looked towards her, I didn't feel anything, but I saw her chair was violently shaking, and her dog was barking. I stood up in shock and said, "Oh my God," and then it suddenly stopped. I couldn't believe what I had just witnessed. It was like a scene from The Exorcist. I was freaked. I ran outside and tried to calm myself down. I was never a believer, but that day shook the shit out of me. When I walked back in, I saw shadow children peeking from the hallway, and I heard children's laughter. I stayed outside the entire time, and went home early. Who wouldn't? My mother told me that she saw some pretty eerie things as well, but couldn't explain them, and didn't want me to think she was crazy. I felt the same way about my experience. I went back a few more times, and every time it was something moving. Chairs shaking violently, kids laughing and running sounds throughout the house, dolls disappearing and reappearing, music playing, dishes breaking, and even a shadow cat meowing. None of it I could explain. I only worked there for a few days until Stella snapped and beat up a new girl who was to take my place. She bit her face, pulled her hair, and scratched her all over. The woman said Stella had unbelievable strength. I couldn't believe the sweet-looking old lady could have the strength to beat a 30-year-old woman to her knees. The police were called, and Stella was placed into a nursing home after the incident, and the house went up for sale. It's never been lived in more than a few months before it goes back on sale, and I wonder if it's because of the freaky crap that goes on in there. The Things in Oregon, submitted by Omar M. This story was told to me and my family by a cousin of mine when I was 11 years old. I'm 28 now, but the eeriness of the story still shocks me to this day. In 2001, my cousin Eric, who was 25, was driving from Southern California to a small town in Oregon called Coos Bay to visit his family. His family used to live in California, but after an unfortunate event, their apartment burning down, they chose to move to Oregon, where they had other family. They were just moving to seek new beginnings. He chose to continue to reside in California since by that time he had already settled down. He was in a serious relationship with his girlfriend, and they had 2 small daughters. In this road trip, it was him, his girlfriend Iris, his 2 daughters, and 2 other cousins, Marcelo and Cindy, who were in their early teens. They all packed for the long road trip ahead of them. The usual: clothing, shoes, pajamas, and their hygiene products. They made sure to leave in the morning early to get a head start from the local traffic, and they were all excited to get to Oregon to reunite with family and enjoy the fresh, foggy weather and green scenery. It takes about 18 hours from Southern Cal to get to Coos Bay without stopping except for gas, food, or bathroom breaks. So with so many people along for the ride, they had a couple of stops along the way, which also made time for some sightseeing in cities like San Francisco, the Shasta Mountains, and Eureka. After a long drive without any sleep for Eric, they'd finally reached Oregon. And by that time, it was very late into the evening, and he was just about 2 hours away from his destination. Not wanting to stop for any other reasons, he continued driving on a very long and lonely road. At that time of the evening, Oregon weather tends to be very cold and foggy, which usually tends to make roads like these more desolate. His girlfriend Iris and the other 2 cousins were awake because they had previously slept, and as Eric was driving, they noticed they were passing by what seemed to be a cemetery. Their surroundings were completely black, and the only light besides the headlights of the car was the moonlight that lit up the cemetery and made the tombstones visible from a distance. Suddenly, Iris spotted what seemed like 2 people standing near the road, and their first thoughts were, maybe they're a couple of hitchhikers, or maybe they're in need of help, maybe they're stranded. So Eric decided to pull over. He slowly approached the 2 individuals. It was 2 males, but was not coming to a complete stop just yet. The headlights from the car barely illuminating them, he noticed something was completely off. Their clothes seemed abnormally torn and worn out, and more than what a homeless person's clothes would look like. From the type of clothing they wore, they seemed to look like fashions from the 40s or 50s, and their skin and bodies looked really deteriorated and old, almost as if they were dead. Out of a tone of fear, Iris told him to keep driving, and that's exactly what he did. He hit the gas with tires burning, and everyone in the car was quiet for several seconds. Shocked and confused, they all started to ask each other, what was that? Unsure of what they had witnessed, they continued driving without any stops or brakes, especially not stopping for anyone on the side of the road. They eventually made it to Coos Bay, safe and sound, but that is one event he says he will not forget. I'm of the Christian faith, so I don't believe it was corpses that got out of their grave or spirits of dead people that might have passed away from that cemetery. But I do believe there was something even worse going on. Maybe it was demonic spirits roaming around for whatever reason. You guys believe what you want. One thing for sure is, that's one creepy incident that would scare anyone. Poltergeist, submitted by Margaret D. So this has been happening for the past few days, and I want to share it with someone. I'm a big believer in most things supernatural, but I'm not some crazy person who revolves around it. I'm still a Christian. Anyway, I'm a homeschooled and self-taught female senior in high school, so I'm home a lot, and alone a lot. I was hanging out with my dog on the couch watching TV in the middle of the day, and I heard a big crash in my backyard, which I could see from a window next to me. It sounded like my dog's food bowl was falling over, so I went outside and checked. His water and food was everywhere, and the bowl holder, a heavy metal bowl holder, was all the way across the yard, and his bowls were in a bush, but far inside, like it had to have been thrown really hard in there. During this time, I was doing laundry and could hear the machine beeping upstairs. So I went up to fold the clothes, trying to forget about the weird bowl thing. As I walked upstairs, I noticed the beeping was a specific beep sound it makes when the door is left open, the door to the machine, that is. This was weird because I remember closing it and pressing start and hearing it go all day, so as I opened the door to the laundry room, my clothes were everywhere, like I'm talking all over the floor. This freaked me out enough to sprint outside and call my boyfriend. He helped calm me down, and I went inside and cleaned up both messes. As the day went on, things were normal. I was just spooked. Later that same day, I was in my room, and my mom yelled at me from upstairs saying that I had left the door open when I came in. Obviously, I knew I didn't because I'd been home all day and didn't even open the front door. My mom swore it was me, so I told her to check the Nest Cam to see who opened it. The Nest Cam is a camera on our front door. She did, and we saw that there was movement and noise on one side, so we played the video, and you could clearly hear the door swing open, and footsteps of something going out the door. But we saw nothing. I mean, mind you, I had been upstairs all night. Today I went to work at a clothing store I work at, and I work the morning shift. We're a very clean company, and we make sure everything is back in place and on the racks, and dressing rooms are clean, and the bathrooms are clean. When I got in this morning, I checked to see if everything was all straight, and it was. I put the door key back in its drawer where it always sits, and my manager came up to me asking me why I messed up the bathrooms and why there's so many clothes in the dressing rooms. I told her I have no idea what you're talking about. I just cleaned them. Lo and behold, as I unlocked the doors to all the bathrooms and dressing rooms, there were clothes everywhere, and toilet paper was all over the bathrooms. Another thing about that, I'm a pretty short person, so all the racks are about head height to me, and I swear, even though I'm the only one there, plus my manager who sits in the way back, I swear I see people walking through, and I have to keep running over to think someone's hiding in the store. Maybe I'm just paranoid on the last one, but I'm really nervous about all of this. It must be some kind of poltergeist ghost or some shit. I just don't know why it's happening to me. Kayaking Trip Gone Wrong by Mint and Apples. This happened in 2001 when I was 15. It was during the summer holiday, and me, my best friend, and one of my cousins were in a state of permanent boredom. Not much to do in our small town. One weekend, we had managed to convince our parents to let us go on a camping trip on our own, just for 2 nights. We were planning to take the kayaks and make our way to a small island in the archipelago and spend the day fishing and swimming. We were all pretty outdoorsy people, and it wouldn't be a problem. We had a great day, and as night approached, we decided to set up our tent and go to sleep. During the process of setting up the tent, my cousin Sophie told us about her last camping trip, where she had been awoken by a curious moose outside of the tent, and we all thought it was hilarious to be scared of a moose. We grilled some fish over the fire before we went to bed, and as we were all pretty tired, we all fell asleep instantly. I woke up a few hours later when Bella, my best friend, sat up straight and pointed towards the entry of the tent. "I heard something," she whispered, and we sat there listening. But the sound was gone, and after a while we fell asleep again. Soon I was woken up again, by Sophie this time. "There's someone outside," she stated, her voice laced with a cold kind of fear that made me instantly wide awake. I tried to see or hear any sign of anybody being outside of our tent, but it took several minutes of staring into nothingness before I saw it. I saw a very slow movement, the light summer night allowing a shadow play on the thin canvas of our tent. It wasn't the shadow of a tree or animal. Or was it? It moved so slow it was hard to know if you imagined it or if it was actually real. We could hear the opening and closing of our cool box and someone stepping on the coal around the fire pit. Bella gripped my forearm tight as she mimed the knife action. Sure enough, we had left our knife outside, the one we had used for the fish hours earlier. We sat there in silence as some unknown person, with unknown intent, was going through our things, and it was only a matter of time before that someone found the knife. And then what? Would he, we all assumed it was a guy, start stabbing at the tent? We couldn't up and run. We would be spotted immediately, and anyway, it was a small island. Who would go there in the middle of the night? Or had that person already been there when we arrived and seen us approach? We barely dared to breathe as we waited for something to happen. We waited until the tension was too much for Bella, always the impulsive one, who reached for her flashlight and was making a move to go outside. We grabbed a hold of her, and the shadow stopped in its tracks outside. We could hear something being dropped and hitting a rock, then slow steps moving in a half circle around the tent, ending up directly behind us, where we couldn't see it anymore. I had never been so frightened in my life, and suddenly Bella shouted, "We have a gun, and we phoned the police," with the voice of someone who meant every word of what she said. There was a soft sound of someone walking on moss, and soon there was nothing but silence. We waited for a while until we worked up the courage to run out of the tent, to the kayaks, and then we left. We didn't take anything with us. We just left. We were back home at dawn and told my parents what had happened. And first they thought we were joking, but then they realized we had actually left all of our stuff, and they realized it was real, and they phoned the police. The police took it more seriously than we had ever thought they would, and there was a reason for that. A few days earlier, a man, an ex-gym teacher, had assaulted his wife very badly and fled the scene before police arrived. They thought he was camping out to avoid being found, and was thought to be dangerous and desperate. We made many more camping trips after this, but after that, we took our dogs with us. A Sobering Climb by Brendan S. We hit sideways, face first, a slapping thud, a sound you're not supposed to hear. Unconscious, one eye open, his body slowly recoiled from the impact, curling against the sandstone. I don't know what anyone said. I just grabbed his harness because it felt like the right thing to do. I grabbed our anchor with my other hand, and blood started to run out of his mouth onto the ledge. Chris grabbed a runner and a locking carabiner to clip him into our anchor. Then he had a seizure, involuntarily groaning and sucking in air for 30 seconds. Is this the last thing people do before they die from head injuries? "Is he breathing?" his partner yelled from the other end of the rope. "Yeah, he's breathing, I said. Jesus, I'm going to be the last person this kid ever talks to, and I don't even know his name. "Hey, what's his name?" I yelled down to his partner. "Peter," he yelled up. "Peter, don't move," I said, and I put my hand on his back. Peter was trying to get up, and I held him down as gently as possible. "Don't move, man, don't move. Chill out, we're going to get you some help." So I start thinking to myself, is anyone a medic? I knew Chris had an expired WFR, but how high were we off the ground? 140 feet maybe? Could I carry someone down from the base of the tower? And do they have helicopters in Moab? Yeah, I guess they do, because they sent one for Aaron Ralston when he cut his arm off. But how long does that take? And how do you fix someone this broken? All those thoughts rushing through my head. I didn't know what I could do for him. Castleton Tower is spooky, steep on all sides. A finger of red sandstone rising 400 feet out of a 1,500-foot talus cone in the desert east of Moab. The easiest route, the Khor Ingalls, is a historic sandbag 5.9 put up in 1961, freed in 1962. Blocky, with an off-width crux pitch, lined with slick calcite spots. I led the first pitch, then watched two people climb the second pitch, and it didn't look straightforward. Then began the most bizarre 15 minutes of my climbing life. As Chris started up the second pitch, a body fell out of the sky. A base jumper who pulled his chute with a loud crack about 100 feet above our heads, and floated down to the road below. Chris then plugged in a few more cams, precariously wedged in a crack 30 feet above the belay. He didn't touch it. It fell anyway. I hopped to my right as it exploded into a million red pieces somewhere above me. 2 blocks sat on a rope where they had cut through the sheath, and I carefully lowered Chris and told the party below us they could go ahead and pass us since our rope was cut, and we needed to figure out what we were going to do next. Peter climbed up, passing us, placing 2 cams above the ledge. The rope was tight when he stopped to hang on the third piece of gear he'd placed, 20 feet above the ledge. The piece pulled out of the crack, and who knows why, and he was high enough above his last cam that when he fell, the rope had no chance of catching him before he hit the ledge. His foot must have caught something and spun him sideways in the air, and his body was parallel to the ground when he hit. You think you're desensitized to violence because you've seen a million violent movies and TV shows. And then a young kid with his whole life ahead of him and all that smashes himself on a ledge 3 feet from you, and you realized how scared you can really get. If what I had seen had been on a movie screen, I would have hidden behind my hand. Human faces aren't supposed to do that, and I don't ever want to see that again. I don't ever want anybody to do that again, even if I'm not there to see it. The party above us rappelled down. Micah was a wilderness EMT, and Hillary had a WFR. They worked to stabilize Peter. We rolled him over, got him comfortable, and he asked what happened 10 times in the next hour. A minimum of a broken jaw, cheekbone, and who knows what else, I thought. I couldn't believe none of his teeth were broken or missing. I called 911. People and ambulances started to show up at the trailhead, and a rescue began to materialize as the sun sank. A helicopter circled toward the tower several times, and we hauled up a litter, a C-collar, a vacuum splint. The sun disappeared. 5 hours after he fell, we watched Skylar from Grand County Search and Rescue wrap down with Peter in a litter in front of him. Then a helicopter hauled him off to Grand Junction, and we walked down the approach trail in the dark. Chris and I drove around Moab the next day, up to Dead Horse Point, worn out. We talked about it every couple of hours, searching for the piece of evidence, the thing you want to hear that means that won't ever happen to me, because who knows why. I kept trying to fix it in my head, the thing you can't take a photo of, a busted human being lying at your feet after he fell doing what you do all the time. I wanted to remember it more than any sunset, summit, hand crack, whatever, and I didn't know why. I drank coffee and stared out the windshield and tried to remember every fall I'd ever taken on gear. Maybe less than 10 falls total. Cams, stoppers, big ones, small ones, you name it. I called all the hospitals on Monday. Asked for Peter, first name, last name. No one by that name ever checked in. I rubbed my forehead, and that night I got an email from Zach. It read, "Peter's okay. Needs extensive facial reconstruction surgery, broken wrist, eating through a straw right now. Doesn't remember anything from the day except the base jumper." Then I got an email from Peter and a photo, and I started laughing in a coffee shop, staring at my laptop screen at this kid and his bruised face that didn't look nearly as bad as I would have imagined. I'm going to see Peter and Zach in a few days, and I don't know exactly what I'll say. Peter doesn't remember anything, and Zach was 30 feet away from him for most of it. I just need to find the words to describe how I saw it, and that I had enough fear and dread and helplessness in one day to last all of us the rest of our climbing lives. And I hope that makes an impact on them as much as it did me. Climbing is an amazing thing, partly because of the possibility of falling, but I try not to think about it. I try really hard not to, all the time, and now it's scary, more than before. When I dropped Chris off at his car at City Market in Moab the next day, we sorted gear minus the cams we left up on the route during the rescue, and the last thing he said to me was, "Dude, don't not climb." And I assured him I won't do that. Rafting in Bali. I never expected whitewater rafting to be so dangerous. I mean, I knew we'd be on a raft going downstream, and I expected it to be scary but fun at the same time. Kind of like being tied behind a boat on a donut, you know? But anyone who's been pulled behind a boat would know that you can expect when the bumps and the waves are coming because they're created by the boat. You know when to hold on tighter because you see your mate turn the boat, and it's just a bit of fun, and if you do lose your grip, it's only water you'll fall into. You have peace of mind because apart from the driver guiding you, there's an observer constantly watching out for your safety. If you want to stop completely, you just give a hand signal and it's over. Well, imagine that, but going downstream at full speed, having no control over where the waves come from, losing communication with the guide, and knowing that if you fall off, you'll get thrown onto rocks, then pulled downstream where boats can't get to you. Yeah, that's what whitewater rafting was like for me. If I had known how dangerous it was going to be, I would have taken the time to carefully choose a company that I could trust before jumping into the first available raft, naive to the fact that something could ever go wrong. I mean, if this wasn't safe, people wouldn't be doing it, right? After walking 600 or so steps through the jungle, trying not to slip on the mud along the way, we made it to the Agung River in Bali. We got put into random groups for a tour, with no consideration for skill or experience. We were asking around, have any of you other guys done whitewater rafting before? And most everyone said, no, we're kind of nervous. Yeah, so were we. Both Will and I were feeling uneasy about the whole thing, and being put with a group where all 6 of us had never done this before was not reassuring. Will and I even swapped seats because we thought all the strong rowers were on one side of the raft. The guy did a 30-second induction, that's it. Basically, he said, when I say stop, stop. When I say left, paddle left. When I say right, paddle right, okay? And that was it, and off we went. In the first 10 seconds, we almost tipped. The second chute, which is just a scary drop, it was the same thing. We even got stuck against a rock for a minute, and we struggled to communicate with the guide, speaking no Balinese, and him not speaking much English. At this point, I was starting to get scared, and I wanted to stop. We got down to the next part, and the guide in the raft in front started joking around and splashing water on us. Not really funny when you're frightened. I don't get scared often, and in fact, I love adrenaline activities as long as they're safely run. So I figured, well, I should relax. If the guides could be so relaxed, then maybe I should just get over the fear and enjoy the ride. We were coming up to the next scary chute, and my heart started beating faster than ever as the raft collected speed from the waves. In the next minute, I was underwater. Bang! Just like that. I remember going, ow! 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 As I tumbled on the hard rocks, bruising all along my shin, leg, and elbow. On top of it, I was crushed by the weight of everyone else. At least I was a cushion for them. When I got to the surface, I couldn't comprehend what just happened. I thought everyone had felt the pain and that it was a serious accident, and for a second I felt extremely lucky to be above water. I forgot I was hurt and quickly glanced in all directions to make sure everyone had reached the surface. But oh shit! Where was Will? My heart sank to the bottom of my stomach. But wait. Oh God, there he was. I noticed he was holding the other end of a paddle that I was desperately gripping onto. His other hand was still holding onto the raft that was stuck to the rock at the top of the chute. I held on for a few seconds without moving, still in shock, and I realized everyone else is fine, but, oh man, then it kicked in. I was in a lot of pain. And at that moment, Will let go, thinking I was fine to just swim to the edge. "Don't let go!" I screamed, scared for my life as I felt the waves start pulling me downstream. I'm a very good swimmer, but I was in so much pain I couldn't swim properly at this point. Will managed to grab hold of the paddle just in time, and by then everyone else had started swimming to safety. But I was extremely exhausted, and I needed to get helped out of the water. When I got to land, it sunk in. I looked at my foot and I freaked out. It was a mess, and my little toe was completely dislocated. Me and pain do not go well together, like at all. I mean, I can't even watch violent scenes in action movies without looking away, let alone seeing my own toe out of place. I've never broken a bone, only fractured a toe. Oddly enough, the same toe. But this is when I started to have a panic attack. I was shaking and there were so many things running through my head. I just want to go home, I was saying. God, do I have travel insurance for this? Oh, shit. Stop looking at me. Why is everyone looking at me? Oh, God, they better hurry the fuck up. This hurts. Oh, shit, now what's happening? I think I'm passing out. All of those thoughts were rushing through my mind, all at once. I settled down for a few seconds and then started feeling dizzy. Will left me for a minute to get help, so I laid on the side of the river and just closed my eyes. I don't recommend that anyone do that when they're in a state of shock. A moment later, I felt something crawling up my bruised leg, and as I looked up, it was the biggest, ugliest, scariest insect I had ever seen, and I screamed out loud. Anyone who's been in the throes of a panic attack knows your emotions are up and down, and you can't think straight, and everything seems more extreme than it really is. Back to the thoughts in my head. Oh, God, this hurts. God, this hurts. I need painkillers. Oh, God, why did this have to happen in Bali? Where's the emergency service? Jesus, this is so stupid. Am I going to be able to walk? Will, where the hell is Will? He's going to have to do everything for me. I don't know. Where are all those rats going? Oh, God, please stop asking me if I'm okay. I'm not. Again, in the throes of shock. This went on for another 45 minutes. Finally, I snapped out of it. Okay, where's the rescue team? When a boat finally arrived, there was no relief. Instead, I was told that I had to raft down to the bottom of the river because we were in the middle of the jungle and no help could get to us. I said point blank, "Are you serious? I've been waiting here this long to hear that? My God, this can't be happening." We couldn't go upstream, I couldn't go down, and there was no chance of a helicopter picking us up, so I felt stuck, in massive pain, with no painkillers. And that's when I noticed a random set of stairs directly across the river. None of the guides knew where it led, but that was the only option I was willing to try to get out of this situation. So we all got back onto the raft, and everyone paddled as fast as they could to the other side of the river before the next chute. Will helped me out of the raft, and our original guide stayed with us while the rest of the group finished their tour with the second guide. I stood up, and I realized there was no way I was going to be able to make it to the top of the steps. There was no railing, but I was determined, so I started to crawl and struggled pulling myself up each step. I was weak and in a lot of pain, not just from my toe, but the general battering that I took while I was underwater. The stairs looked like they hadn't been used in years and were covered in mud and tree branches. I looked up at the never-ending staircase, and I started to cry. Oh, God, why is this happening on vacation? Will and our Balinese guide ended up taking turns to help carry me up the steep stairs in the scorching heat, taking a break every minute or so. There was at least 1,000 steps to get to the top of this giant hill, and I'm not exaggerating, it went on forever. I was so grateful to our guide and to Will for helping me get up there, and it must have been back-breaking, and I wouldn't have been able to do it without them both. When we finally got to the top, we saw security fences blocking our only path out, and I couldn't believe what I was seeing, especially after all the effort we'd just been through to get there. But luckily, there was no lock on the gate. Hooray! The gate led us to a luxury resort, and as soon as I saw people, my heart filled with gratitude. My prayers had been answered, and I had made it to safety without losing my mind. There was no ambulance, but our driver picked us up and took us to the hospital. A really nice Balinese lady from the Whitewater Rafting Company came with us, and I was relieved to find out that they had insurance. At the hospital, I was given very strong painkillers and taken to get an x-ray, and I was lucky that my toe was only dislocated and not broken. I was told there was a 4-hour wait to see the next available specialist, but hey, that was okay with me. I was high on painkillers, and as long as I couldn't feel anything, I didn't mind how long I'd have to wait. 8 hours after the accident, I was finally being seen by a doctor who was able to put my toe back in place. Though what I didn't realize was that the local anesthetic doesn't stop any pain. I mean, even pain from the needle going in was unbearable, so a lot of effort went into convincing me to keep going. 15 seconds of the doctor wriggling my bone around to find the right spot was the most excruciating pain I'd ever experienced, and I don't wish that upon anyone. I think the whole hospital heard me screaming, and Will even said it looked like I was being possessed by a demon. Yeah, haha, Will. But once it was done, it was done. This story may seem overdramatic for some of you, especially if you've been through a lot more pain in your life, and I can understand that. But for someone who's never broken a bone and doesn't deal well with pain at all, it was terrifying for me at the time. It's been over a month now, and the recovery could not have gone any better. My rafting accident could have been a lot worse, and I've heard many fatal rafting stories since then, so I guess I was very lucky. I'm sharing this story not to scare you, nor to make you never want to go whitewater rafting. I just want to raise awareness that whitewater rafting can go wrong, and everybody should be prepared if you're thinking about doing it. I would absolutely recommend researching any company's safety standards, reviews, and the training they provide before you go out. Later, we found out that our guide had never had 6 people in a raft before. It never crossed my mind that Bali and many other places don't have emergency services like we may be used to in our home countries. Don't apply the same safety expectations and be as naive as I was wherever you go. Just because it might be safe back home doesn't mean it is abroad. Also, the last thing I'll leave you with is communication is key in whitewater rafting. So I recommend ensuring that you can comfortably speak with your guide before getting into any raft. In dangerous situations, it can be the difference between getting out safely and potential disaster. I count myself as one of the lucky ones. Racing Nightmare, submitted by F. Tom Brady. Back in the mid-2000s, my best friend and I were really into cycling, both road and mountain biking. We entered in all the local races and even some out-of-staters, including some 24-hour relays in the two-man competitions. Outside of it being fun, we were really into pushing ourselves to see what we could do and how long we could be out there killing it. For this story, I'll refer to my friend as K. One spring, a new race popped up for midsummer that was going to combine a bunch of disciplines: mountain biking, trail running, and overland orienteering. It was a daunting task with a 5K running leg, about 12 miles of bush orienteering, a 20K mountain bike, and then another 8K run to finish off. The race was to be held on state-owned land that we were really familiar with, as there were other races held there all the time. However, we also knew that the surrounding area could be pretty shady with some shady characters. That would play out with both people in the race and on the outside. So we signed up. We got all the extra safety shit required for it we normally never used or carried, like all-weather blankets and emergency whistles, etc. We got there early on the day of and signed in, had our equipment verified, and then took stock of the situation. The race was a standard shotgun start with mental tests between each stage, that is, math problems to not only challenge but to give the officials a chance to see how everyone was holding up. We realized that was a good idea straight away as we sized up the crowd. Some serious racers, some people out to have a good challenge, and a whole lot of people who, pardon my French, had no fucking business being out there at all. I was blown away to see people wearing jean shorts and cotton t-shirts. I mean, it was July in the Northeast, and outside of the temps being in the high 80s, even the dumbest boob knows that that kind of clothing is not appropriate for workouts, let alone grueling racing like this. This was red flag number 1 for me. Honestly, most of them were harmless, and we found out most of the folks dropped out early. I mean, hell, when we were finishing the entire thing, there were people who hadn't even started the bike portion of the race. Anyway, the race got underway and we were having a good time and just pacing ourselves based on nothing, as we had never done any orienteering before. Kay and I fell in with a male-female team as we hit the forest in search of the first checkpoint, and there was a lot of laughing and messing around with the compass, and we were having a blast. We noticed that one of the last checkpoints lay on the very edge of the state-owned land, and in between that there was a very thin slice of non-state-owned no-man's land. The rules strictly stated that racers could not leave the competition area, and the temptation to cut this corner reared itself to us. So obviously it did with others, no doubt. At the last checkpoint before that one, we stopped for a water and a Cliff Bar break for like 3 minutes before moving on. We heard a cry from behind us and saw a male team slowly limping toward the tree we were standing at. One of the guys had sprained his ankle really badly, and they needed someone to let the officials know of their predicament. We all figured the stupid asshole whistles we had to carry would do absolutely dick this far out. So we told them to stay put, and we'd relay the information when we got back, which we figured would be about another half hour if we kept moving the way we were. That's when another team came up. Some guys younger than us. One of them made some kind of smart-ass remark about the older dude with the bad wheel, and a heated back and forth broke out. To this day, I can't say why there was tension there, but it was, with all 4 of them calling one another names and making threats. Kay and I just shook our heads and started out. We couldn't help notice the 2 younger guys going straight for the last checkpoint, in the direction of the out-of-bounds area. Red flag number 2. The injured team noticed it too, and said if there was a discrepancy in times due to the younger guys cheating, they would bring it up that they saw them going for the cheat. We just laughed and quickly moved off. We ended up hitting the checkpoint before the other guys anyway, and like I said, we were really pushing ourselves at this point, and we hightailed it back to the starting point to begin the bike portion of the race. Mounting our bikes, an official said we were actually in first place, and we were blown away with our progress and position. We did tell the organizers about the guy with the ankle, and then we set off on the trail. Now, the first long leg of the ride went right back to where we had just been. It skirted the last two checkpoints and went right by the sliver of no man's land. We were making good time as a lot of this first piece was downhill, and when we got near the edge of the state land, we noticed two guys on the side of the trail. One guy was wearing camo pants and a black tank top. The other was not wearing a shirt but was wearing overalls, and certainly none of these cats was in the race. And the guns they were carrying also tipped us off that something was up. As we were slowly coming down, Kay yelled back, "Yo, you see that?" And I said over to him, "Oh, yeah, what the fuck?" He slowed down so we were side by side on the trail that was about to narrow to a double through the section where these guys were standing. We stopped completely and checked them out. They hadn't noticed us as we were above them on the trail. "What do you think this is about?" I asked Kay, and he shook his head. "I don't know. Let's just blow past him," he said. And we got ready to kick it down the hill. But then, as if they heard us, the two guys looked up and saw us. They came alive and lifted their shotguns waist high, and one guy waved us down, but he didn't look too friendly even from the distance we were at. "Okay, dude, this is fucked up," said Kay. The guys kept motioning to us, and we looked at them closer. Pretty rough-looking guys. They both had really long dreads and were grimy looking. "Stick with the plan," I said. "They must be looking for somebody else." Yeah, in retrospect, I'd rethink this plan. Kay just shrugged, and down we went, picking up speed. The guys stood their ground until the last second, as soon as they noticed we were not going to slow down. One brought up his shotgun and shot into the air, which freaked the shit out of us, and I almost rode off the double track. The other guy came to life and did the same thing, but at this point there was no way we were going to jam on the brakes. They also realized this and jumped out of our way at the last second, yelling, "You're fucking dead!" And we flew past. The trail stayed flat for a bit and then started to climb about 100 yards away, but this was still a pretty open area. The trees didn't close in on the trail until it turned to single track about 400 more yards away, and the guys were still yelling at us and were trying to run after us when we looked back at them. Then, suddenly, something burst from the edge of the trees between them and us, the trees being about 30 feet from the trail on either side back at that point. Hey, what do you know? It was the two troublemakers from the checkpoint. They were trying to run across the trail to the other side, and the gunman jumped after them. It hit us that something was way more wrong than we imagined, and Kay and I looked at each other. "I know they're assholes, but those guys are in trouble, man. They probably need our help," I said. And as dumb as it sounds, we turned around and shot down the slope as the four were starting to fight. Thank God that shotguns had been dropped. We unclipped from our pedals and ran to the four of them and tried to break them up with a lot of yelling and swearing. And then suddenly 2 other racers were in our midst and helping quell the situation. Camouflage guy got away and ran for his shotgun, and he picked it up and pointed it at us. Everyone stopped dead in their tracks. Through the heavy breathing and tension, I asked the guy what the fuck he thought he was doing. Overalls guy crawled over to his buddy and sat on his haunches. "Trespassing is illegal," said Overall guy, and the rest of us just stood there. What the fuck was this guy talking about? "This is state land, meathead," said Kay, and us 4 riders started walking towards the scumbags. The 2 troublemakers just stood there. I absent-mindedly picked up the other shotgun, and like lightning, the 2 guys made their move back into the brush, and Kay and I went after them. Stupid, yeah, but they did shoot at us. Well, sort of. If we knew where they were going, we could at least tell the rangers and cops what was up. We followed them along a little path for a couple of 100 feet, and it became apparent where these guys came from and what was going on real soon. The path opened up to a fairly large grow operation. Row after row and plant after plant, the skunkweed was growing thick and sticky back here. The guys had disappeared in the farm and we all stopped. "All right, let's get the fuck out of here," said Kay, and the four of us ran back to our bikes as fast as we ran into the place. The two morons were still standing there. To shorten this long story up, the two morons had cheated and cut through the verboten territory, which happened to be this huge pod operation. The growers saw them and had chased them all over the place until they lost them in the trees, and in their weed-soaked brains, they assumed that Kay and I were the same people when we came by. Yeah, look, I'm not totally down on the lettuce, but damn, it can cook your brain sometimes. I had chucked the shotgun into the woods, and we basically told these assholes that they were assholes and deserved to have been caught by those guys. We got back on our bikes and got back into the race, and we didn't give them a second thought. Leaving Tweedledee and Tweedledum behind, Kay and I finished the race and ended up coming in second to the guys who came up on us. We blamed those two assholes for costing us first place, but we didn't see them for the rest of the day. We weren't even sure if they got back to the finish line and just jumped into a vehicle and drove away, or if they were still out in the woods or what. We didn't really care. We mentioned them to the race folks, and they said they'd handle it, and park authorities and the state police were notified of everything else that we told them. So, yeah, that was a crazy adrenaline day for more than one reason. The funny thing is I was back there for another race a few weeks later, and the talk of the town was that the grow fields had been hastily harvested before the cops got there, and no one saw anything else like that out there, let alone the two psycho guard growers who thought it was a good idea to shoot at some racers. It's been so long since this happened, but Kay and I still reminisce on it and think about how close we had come to some serious trouble. Being the people we are now, I doubt we'd handle things the same way, but I'm sure the testosterone of two 20-something-year-old guys didn't help our decision-making process back then. It was, without a doubt, the craziest race I had ever participated in, and the closest I've ever come to outlaws and the wrong end of a shotgun. Out Alive by Molly L. I only lost control for an instant, but the fast-moving water swung my boat sideways, and within seconds, the current glued me to a submerged barrier of downed trees. I was living every kayaker's nightmare. A bramble of branches, or a fallen tree, also known as a strainer, acts like a sieve, trapping a boat as building water pressure pushes it underwater, sometimes with the boater still inside. Within seconds, most of my 13-foot inflatable kayak, and half of my body, was immersed in the 55-degree river. Would the current trap me against the wall of 2-inch thick branches? My mind reeled. Am I going to die? About a week earlier, my husband Ralph and I joined two friends, Barb and Henry, for a 10-day trip of a lifetime along a remote stretch of the Koyukuk River, deep in Alaska's Brooks Range. A ranger at Gates of the Arctic National Park warned us the river was running high and fast, but we weren't fazed. We had chosen the Koyukuk because of its family-friendly reputation. And though we expected to encounter swift water on our 113-mile route, the river's average drop is fewer than 8 feet per mile, nothing compared to the 30 to 50 foot per mile whitewater runs, so we expected plenty of lazy river-style paddling. On day one, we realized we'd underestimated the wet summer's impact on the current. Within hours of setting out, Barb and Henry's canoe capsized and they lost both their paddles. Luckily, they had one spare, and we were able to jury-rig a second out of driftwood. Their scary swim was a wake-up call for all of us. We grew anxious about unanticipated rapids, the fast-moving flow, and our route's remoteness. But over the next week, we navigated the river's upper reaches conservatively, with few incidents. On day 8, my luck changed. I was eyeing two paths around a small island and veered toward one with the hidden strainer. As I realized my mistake, the river sucked me towards the blockage, and within seconds I broadsided it. I thought my limbs would get stuck in the loosely spaced branches if I climbed atop the strainer, so instead of trying that standard escape tactic, I grabbed a bough overhead and hoped that I could pull my boat from the tangle. I leaned hard to the kayak's high side, trying to keep the upstream edge from getting pushed under, but I was no match for the force of the current. Within seconds, my legs were almost completely submerged. Downstream, Ralph was able to beach his boat and run back along the shoreline to help me. Neither of us had swiftwater rescue training, so we'd never tried best practice techniques like rope rescues. Eventually, Ralph opted to take a huge risk, enter the water himself. He decided the waist-deep 8-mile-an-hour current was slow and shallow enough for him to try to wade up and help me out. Ralph fought his way toward me through the icy cold water, and we both would have been much safer if we'd had our entire group to help with the rope-assisted rescue. When he was within reach, I grabbed his hand and stepped into the river. I knew that one false move might put us both underwater, trapped against the bushes, but I fought the current and reached shore safely. Ralph freed the boat before a hypothermic chill set in, and later, as we regrouped and warmed up next to a campfire, I was finally able to relax. Our final day would be short, and we'd pass through a broad, slow valley en route to the pullout. Good thing. I'd had plenty of excitement for one trip. This story is an excerpt from Jan D. Curran's book, The Appalachian Trail, A Journey of Discovery, published by Rainbow Books. A link to this publication is in the description below. The room in the Tennessee Hills Motel was plain, but it was air-conditioned. The bed had sheets, and the bathroom boasted a tub with a shower. The hot water taps in the first room I was assigned did little more than leak water, and I was given another room after I complained. The motel also had an adjoining restaurant, closed for renovation. That was an unpleasant surprise. It was 3 miles back to town. With no bus or taxi service available, that meant either walking or hitchhiking, both of which were really unacceptable options. The motel clerk was very understanding of my predicament, though. She put me in contact with a man who, for $5, offered to drive me that evening to the local Pizza Hut. I was starved for fresh food, and made 2 trips to the salad bar, heaping my plate each time. Then I ate a medium pizza supreme, plus a spaghetti dinner, and washed it all down with a pitcher of beer. The waitress was astonished at my appetite. "You're too little to be eating so much," she said. It was the first time in a long time anyone had said I was little. My chauffeur appeared after supper, bringing him with a 6-pack of beer as arranged, and a friend not arranged. The conversation on the way back to the motel was dominated by the driver's friend.
"Where are you from?"
he asked. Naples, Florida," I replied.
"Where's that?"
"Over on the West Coast."
"You're walking the whole trail, I hear. You a school teacher?"
No, I'm retired military."
"Which branch?"
"Army."
"What rank was you?"
His questions and tone of voice irritated me. There was nothing subtle or any indication of the least bit of sensitivity in his style. I changed the subject. "My feet are about to kill me," I put in quickly. "Boots are wearing out. Any place in town that sells boots?"
"What kind of boots you looking for?"
Hiking boots. Maybe high-tech or New Balance." "No one in town sells anything like that," the driver allowed. "You're probably going to have to go to Johnson City." "How far is that?" I asked. "About 15 miles.
"Was you in Vietnam?"
Another question from the friend. "Yeah," I answered. Then, without waiting for another question, I asked the driver if he could give me a lift to Johnson City the next day. "Long as it's not too early in the morning," he said. "Give me a call when you're ready to go."
"I got a cousin that was a sergeant major in the Army,"
the friend said proudly.
"That's a damn good rate. He says the Army's full of niggers. You see many niggers in the Army?"
I replied, "I didn't see any niggers in the Army." He stopped and thought a minute about what I had said. I doubted he understood.
"You don't see no niggers around here, do you?" "No, sir. Any nigger comes into this town, he's in trouble. They know better than to come into Irwin."
He proclaimed this with authority. I just bit my tongue as we drove into the motel driveway.
"What rank was you?"
he persisted. I looked him in the eye, put my face up to his like I was going to let him in on a big secret, and then I got out without a word. I headed for town on foot the next morning, sticking my thumb out at the approach of every passing car, but no one stopped. I walked the entire 3 miles. I stopped first at a neat, very clean laundromat where the charming woman custodian chatted with customers and helped incompetents like me who couldn't figure out how the machine worked. She gave me a cup of ammonia to put in my wash along with the soap, and it helped immensely in getting my clothes clean. After following the woman's instructions and starting the machine, I selected a seat from a row of waiting chairs and began a conversation with the only other customer, a middle-aged woman waiting for her clothes to dry. I mentioned that I was through hiking the AT, and that caught her interest as well as that of the custodian, who joined our conversation. "You see many snakes?" asked the customer. "A few garter snakes and black snakes, but no rattlers. One copperhead and one rattlesnake, but it was dead. Snakes don't bother me." I was about to say that snakes are actually helpful because they have a niche in the food chain and help keep rodents and pests under control. But the woman said, "I'm scared to death of them. The only snake I want to see is a dead snake." "Ain't you scared being out there all alone all the time? What if something happened?" "I'm not really afraid to be alone. No animal is going to bother me, and the only thing I worry about is running into some crazy who thinks he has a message from God to kill me." "There are a few of those folks running around, too," she said, nodding her head in sage agreement. "Wasn't too long back some man killed a girl on the trail near here. He was a tree surgeon, near as I can recollect." "Of course, I carry a gun in the event I might run into a nut like that," I said. "The people in the ATC and the Philosopher's Guide say you shouldn't carry a gun, that if you think you need a gun, you don't understand the trail. I agree with their philosophy. It's just that I want to be protected from someone else who doesn't understand that." The custodian watched me intently and nodded in agreement. The customer agreed. "I'd damn sure carry one if I was you." The conversation stopped as her clothes dryer stopped. After folding my clothes, I headed for the post office where a sign above the counter indicated that the place was closed on Wednesday afternoons. I looked at my watch. 12:30 p.m. "Damn it," I hissed. My remark startled another man who was sorting mail he had collected from his mailbox. "I didn't mean to disturb you. I'm just venting my frustration at having walked over 3 miles to get to the post office, only to find it closed." We talked for a minute, and I explained that I was through hiking the AT, and that I was only in town for the day to rest and reprovision. I also mentioned that I needed to go to Johnson City to get a new pair of boots. He said he was going to Johnson City later in the day, but right then he had errands to do. If he saw me on the road later, he'd give me a lift back to the motel or to Johnson City. I thanked him and went out to hitch a ride back to the motel, and I got one almost immediately from an older man in a pickup truck. He told me he wouldn't have stopped if he hadn't mistaken me for someone else. However, since I was already in the truck, he'd take me as far as the road where he turned to go to his farm. As he drove, he told me about an argument he had had with a man who challenged him about the way he drove. He said the other man had come around to my side of the truck saying he was going to kick my butt. I always carry a gun under the seat, and held it up so he could see it, and told him he'd better get away from me. I glanced down to see if I could see the gun, and it must have been under the seat. I wondered if all this was for my benefit, in case I might have had any ideas of robbing him. "Should have seen how fast that bastard run back to his car," he said. The man became so involved in his story now that he passed the road to his house and carried me all the way to the motel. I returned to the Pizza Hut that evening for one last raid on the salad bar. The waitress who had waited on me the previous night saw me come in. Although I was led to a different section, she evidently said something to the kitchen staff, and when I looked up, the eyes of the whole staff were riveted on me. About halfway through my pizza, my chauffeur, the one with the racist friend, appeared and came over to my table. He offered to take me back to the motel, making the offer sound like it was being made in friendship. Then, when I accepted, he said it would be $3. I was tempted to tell him to forget it, but it was growing late and I was tired. Anyway, I didn't want to hitchhike or walk the road in the dark. I let it pass. At this point, he went over to a booth to join his friend, and they waited until I was finished. The friend, who had entered earlier, feigned surprise at seeing me, saying if he had known I was there, he would have joined me. Of course, he was lying through his teeth. He was the sort that checked everything out before he sat down. He saw me before I saw him, but chose to keep his distance. I suspected he had called the chauffeur to inform him that I was at the place. I didn't trust either man. After dealing with all types of people in the Army, I had developed a gut instinct that told me when to be wary. It was a split-second thing that I came to rely on, because I was right 95% of the time. It wasn't that they were overtly threatening or even rude. They were unnaturally differential to a fault, and that's what made me uneasy. They were not the type to be differential to anyone. The fact that they both just happened to be there when I was there also made me uneasy. They could be setting me up. The friend's big black Lincoln was in the parking lot. He lamented the damage done to the front end of it when, in a drunken stupor the previous night, he had driven it off the road. Although his words contained a message of unhappiness, they also contained, by some strange twist of logic, a hint of braggadocio. The crumpled fender and bumper turned the headlight in such a way that it looked at me goo-goo-eyed. I climbed into the back seat of the chauffeur's car. I didn't want the friend in my rear and began thinking about what I could do should they try anything. The friend again dominated the conversation. This time it was directed at my chauffeur. Fine by me. We reached the motel 5 minutes later, and after paying my $3, I exited the car with a sense of relief. Beauty Spot was just as the name implied, a beautiful ridge-top bald with grand views of the mountains in all directions. A Forest Service road led to the open summit, where a cul-de-sac loop provided easy reversal of direction. Next to the road was ample parking space. The trail crossed the Forest Service road several times on the way up to the ridge. During one crossing, 2 vehicles rounded a bend in the road about 500 feet down the hill. I continued into the forest and stopped about 25 yards inside the tree line to watch the cars. One was a 4-wheel drive wagon, perhaps a Ford Bronco or an International Scout. The other was a red, older model Ford sedan. 2 men were in the front seat of each vehicle, and later, as I neared the open bald, I heard the sound of a vehicle on the summit. Then it became quiet. I hurried up the hill hoping to meet the people on the summit, but the car had driven off well before I arrived. The views of Roan Mountain, Big Bald, the Black Mountains, and the Nolichucky River were spectacular. The trail guide indicated that a spring was located on the far side of the summit, and since I had used all my water during the climb, I headed for the spring. I couldn't find the Blue Blaze trail that led to the spring, and I reread the trail guide and realized I had made an error. I retraced my steps back to the trail. As I walked through a small patch of young forest just beyond the summit, I heard a vehicle driving very slowly up the Forest Service road towards the summit loop I had just passed. Then I heard another vehicle further away being driven very slowly along the same road in the opposite direction, as if the driver was searching for something. I didn't pay much attention, but my curiosity was aroused. Eventually, the trail climbed to within a few feet of the ridgetop road. I found the Blue Blaze trail to the spring and stopped when I heard the car that had been on the summit approaching, after again being driven at a very low rate of speed. It was clear the driver was searching for something. Maybe looking to poach a deer, I thought. Then it sunk in. They were searching only that small area repeatedly. Must be after something else, I mused. I was about to cross the road to the spring when the car that had been on the summit came around the bend. Instinctively, I stayed inside the woodline and crouched behind some tangled growth until it passed. I don't know why I did that, except my suspicions had been aroused. It appeared to be the same wagon I'd seen earlier while climbing the mountain. After it was out of sight, I crossed the road and headed down the mountainside for the spring. As I approached the spring, I again heard a car being driven very slowly along the road on the ridge directly above me. I removed my pack and took a break, washing my face and gulping down as much of the clear spring water as I could hold. I was troubled by the activities of the people in the cars. They were certainly looking for something. And then it struck me. Maybe they were looking for me. Visions of my 2 chauffeurs appeared in my mind. I had stupidly allowed them to see that I was carrying a number of traveler's checks when I took my money from my wallet to pay them for the ride. Now my imagination took over. What will I do if I meet them? For the first time on the hike, I took my .38 caliber Smith & Wesson pistol from my pack and slipped it into my trouser pocket. I began to anticipate how I might react in different scenarios. The trick would be to determine their intentions. Since I couldn't be sure, I decided I had several options. The first option was to evade them. The second was to react quickly at the first sign of hostile intent. The third was to show I was carrying a weapon. Just stay out of sight, I told myself. That's the way to handle this one. Stay off the roads and stay off the trails. After a few minutes, I headed back for the trail. And just before I reached the road, the car that had passed above the spring on its way to the summit returned, again driving very slowly. I remained hidden behind the underbrush until it passed, then quickly crossed the road. Almost immediately after I crossed, I heard an automobile start up down the road to my left, but the car was moving in the other direction. After a few long minutes, the car returned from the summit, and I slipped well back into the forest and allowed it to pass before returning to the pathway. Although separated from the road only by a few yards, the trail was well concealed by thick vegetation for the next several hundred yards. I moved cautiously, staying keenly aware of sounds, and after a time, I couldn't hear the cars. That worried me even more. As long as I could hear the cars, I knew I was safe. Were the men now on foot? Then I arrived at a break in the woods at the same time the two cars departed in opposite directions. They were definitely the same cars I had seen during my climb towards Beauty Spot. One car headed back up the hill toward the summit, and the other down the road toward Irwin, driving very slowly. I waited until they were well out of sight before crossing the exposed area. The clearing was several hundred yards long. The path was sited between a pasture fence and the road with almost no concealment available for 200 yards. After 100 yards, there was an access drive from the road to the pasture gate. Several head of cattle watched as I walked along the fence, and when I reached the pasture gate, about halfway across the open area, the car that had been headed in the direction of Irwin returned. I was fully exposed. Just keep on going, I told myself. When it gets close, drop down in the trail. Fortunately, a slight dip in the path and a growth of bushes and tall grass came in sight. I slipped behind them and hunkered down until the car passed. Then I arose and headed quickly down the pathway. The car stopped. They'd seen me. I glanced back up the road from where I had come and could see the men getting out of the car. It was the old red Ford. They had parked next to the pasture access and were looking in the other direction. I didn't wait around to see what they were doing. The trail dipped out of sight from the pasture access, and I moved out at double time until I began the climb up Unaka Mountain. I was thrilled to see the road fall away behind me. Later, as I reflected on the episode, I became convinced the men in the cars were looking for me. If they'd been looking for game, they would not have searched so intensely in one place. If they were looking for a lost animal, a dog or a cow, they would have searched beyond the narrow area where the trail paralleled the road. They were literally combing the area where the road closely paralleled the trail, and no further. It was with a feeling of relief that I climbed toward Unaka. I kept up a full head of steam as I hit the summit of Unaka Mountain and pushed on to Low Gap. I had originally intended to camp overnight at Low Gap, but I decided to put as much distance as possible between me and those men. I didn't slow down until I reached Cherry Gap, where the shelter was far from any roads. I'll never know for sure if the danger was real or imagined, but in light of other events, I feel the danger was real. And my mom had to drive there as we lived in Saskatchewan, which is where Billy Charles' boy is from. You look nice, son. Real spiffy. I want to leave that in so bad. Okay, anyway. Okay. Shit, I can't get that out of my head. Oh, you know why I'm going to do it, Joe? Because I want you to have a heart attack and die. You and your fucking fashion shows. Sorry, gang. Little slap shot reference there. Okay.